All right, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is July 30th, 2025, about 7:20 p.m. where I'm at right now, and we are continuing our 13th book in our Book to React series with episode 13 of Black Bolshevik, Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist. Give a shout out to Comrade Kamal. He is the leader of the Defense from Crackerdom League. He is the lieutenant. If you want to submit your application, send it to Kamal. He'll get you fitted out in your uniform and give you that stick. Anyway, we're going to be continuing reading this wonderful text that has garnered a lot of attention. I did not expect this book to actually be probably the second biggest book that I've read on this channel. Of course, the biggest book we read was Black Men, White Women, Illicit Sex in the 19th Century South by Martha Hodes, which was a fabulous book. But I did not expect this 700-page book about a black man who lived last century, who was not famous during his lifetime, at least amongst mainstream circles, to be possibly, one of the more popular books that we've read on this series. I'm very surprised by the support we're getting from this, from the comments that we're getting, from the views that we're getting. I'm very, very happy that people are tuning into this. And it's not for me. It's for this man's life. It's for this man's legacy, and it's for actually learning from what this man went through, which is very deep and profound, right? So I want to give once again, one more thanks to everybody out there, and let's continue. So once again, the reason we're reading this book is not only to educate myself, but also educate the people. It's to preserve these rare books that are hard to find, that are slowly going out of print. So if you want to get a copy of Black Bolshevik yourself, it's going to cost you around 650 pounds, which I think in US dollars is about 670 US dollars. That's the hardcover version. The paperback version, which is probably used, is about 50 US dollars or so. So the price has been going down on that paperback version, but that hardcover version, which is probably very rare, probably only one in existence, probably autographed by Harry Haywood himself. You can get that on Amazon. Yeah, I'm not selling it, by the way. I don't have any endorsement to read this book or anything like that. I'm just doing it out of the love. But if you want to get a copy of this book for the free ski, go to libcom.org, scroll down, and click this link for the attachment to get it yourself and read it yourself if you don't like my reading style. Anyway, we finished chapter 9 in our last reading, and today we're going to be completing all of chapter 10, Lovestone Unmasked. In the previous chapter, Harry Haywood was making arguments for black nationalism to members of the CPUSA. And also to the CPSU, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and also fighting against the rightward tendencies that existed in both parties. So in this chapter, Lovestone Unmasked, I believe he's going to be continuing his assault on the rightward tendencies within the left-wing Communist Party, because within every party, within every group, within every organization, you have a variation of opinions and beliefs about the direction the party should go. So let's start here, and I'll be giving my commentary. Let's start. Otto, Harold, Williams, and Farmer, having completed their course at Kutva, left the Soviet Union after the 6th Congress. The African, Benkol, remained for further training to prepare him for work in the Gold Coast, Ghana. At Kutva, there was another contingent of black students from the U.S. Along with Maud White, there were now William S. Patterson, or Wilson, Herbert Newton, Mary Houston, and many more were to come. I was then 30 and had recently completed my last YCL assignment as a delegate to the 5th Congress of the Young Communist International. Along with my studies at the Lenin School, I was continuing my work in the Comintern. I was then vice chairman of the Negro Subcommission of the Eastern Colonial Secretariat, and Nasanov was chairman. The subcommission was established as a watchdog committee to check on the application of the 6th Congress decisions with reference to the black national question in the U.S. and South Africa. According to our reports, the South Africans were applying the line of the 6th Congress, and so we devoted most of our attention to the work in the United States. In the U.S., the minority girded itself for a long struggle against the Lovestone Pepper leadership, which had emerged from the 6th Congress battered but not beaten. This leadership still enjoyed the majority support within the party. This was due primarily to the widely prevalent belief within the party that this leadership was favored by the Comintern. Lovestone was loud in his protestations of support for the line of the Sixth Congress and attempted to pin the right-wing label on the minority. This deception was successful for a short time. The Communist International support for Lovestone seemed confirmed by a letter from the ECCI dated September 7, 1928, a week after the adjournment of the Sixth Congress. The letter contained two documents. The first was the final draft of paragraph 49 of the Thesis on the International Situation and Tasks of the Communist International, which dealt with the U.S. Party. The second was a supplementary decision by the Political Secretariat of the Executive Committee of the Communist International, which denied the minority's charge that the Lovestone Pepper leadership represented a right line in the party. Paragraph 49 commended the party, saying it has displayed more lively activity and has taken advantage of symptoms of crisis in American industry. A number of stubborn and fierce class battles, primarily the miners' strike, found in the Communist Party a stalwart leader. The campaign against the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti was also conducted under the leadership of the party. I gotta say this, if the Communist Party of the United States of America were really radical right now, they would be leading the campaign to free Luigi Mangione. I believe right now the Communist Party of the United States should be leading the charge on trying to free Luigi Mangione on the basis that he was doing self-defense. He was defending himself from a rigged system that would have allowed himself to die and other Americans to die at the hands of a crooked healthcare system. That's just my opinion, though. That's just my opinion. I think we as communists, as socialists, we need to be taking advantage of every opportunity to be ahead of the issues and be the stalwart frontmen of every issue that the people generally agree with, especially if they're fighting against capitalism. Free Luigi Mangione. Let me know what y'all think. Should Luigi be free? Is this a popular position? Should this be a position that the party takes? I actually want to put that in the chat right now because I think this is a good starting point to gauge what the party should be doing, what the leader, the vanguard party of the workers of the world should be advocating for. Free Luigi? I would say so. It might take a while. I might put the poll in the chat later because the internet is slow. Anyway, it also criticized the party, stating that the party has not, with sufficient energy, conducted work in the organization of the unorganized and of the Negro movement, and it does not conduct a sufficiently strong struggle against the predatory policy of the United States and Latin America. It concluded by stating, these mistakes, however, cannot be ascribed to the majority leadership alone. The most important task that confronts the party is to put an end to the factional strife, which is not based on any serious differences on principles. The thesis pointed out that while some righteous errors had been committed by both sides, the charge against the majority of the Central Committee of the U.S. Party of representing a right line is unfounded. Okay? Hold on, we got the internet working now. I got to start that poll. Should Luigi Mangione be free? Let me know what y'all think. Let me know what y'all think about that. We'll put that in there. We can come back to that later. All right. Anyway, let's go here. The letter evoked great jubilation among Lovestone Pepper cohorts and was given widest publicity. A self-laudatory statement from the Central Committee was published alongside the CI letter in the October 3, 1928 Daily Worker. It boasted that the letter proved that the CI is continuing its policy of supporting politically the present party leadership. Of course, we in the minority resented Lovestone's interpretation of the CI's letter. We felt that the CI's criticism of all factionalism and its rejection of our specific charge against the Lovestone Pepper leadership were not equivalent to a political endorsement for Lovestone. The Comintern called for unity in the party on the basis of the Sixth Congress decisions. We could hardly expect the CI to come out in support of the minority. It was not a cohesive ideological force itself. The subsequent defection of Cannon to Trotskyism further demonstrated the lack of ideological cohesion in the minority. Then there was the hard fact that Lovestone still held the majority of the U.S. party. Differences of principle between the minority and the Lovestone leadership had begun to develop only a half year before at the Fourth Congress of the RILU in March 1928. These arose over the question of trade unions, but even here they were clouded by factionalism and vacillation on the part of the minority. There was, therefore, substance to the CI's charges that both groups had placed factional consideration above principles. About the same time, the party was shocked by the defection of James Cannon and his close associates Max Schottman and Marty Aburn. They were exposed as hidden Trotskyists and expelled from the party. Cannon's treachery was first exposed by the minority. This frustrated Lovestone's attempt to pin the label of Trotskyism on our group. Nevertheless, Lovestone sought to use the Trotsky issue to divert the party from the struggle against the main right danger. Later, the Comintern was to criticize the minority for its lack of vigilance and its failure to disassociate itself at the right time from Cannon's Trotskyism. Lovestone was cocky and overconfident. He was looking forward to wiping out the minority as a political force in the U.S. party at the next convention. Even the recall to Moscow of Pepper, his main advisor and co-factionalist, shortly after the return of the U.S. delegation, seemed not to shake his self-confidence. Pepper had originally come to the U.S. as a Comintern worker and was thus directly subject to its discipline. His recall was undoubtedly an indication of Lovestone's declining support within the Comintern. The Lovestone leadership supported Pepper's protest against recall. The CI did not press the issue at the time, and Pepper remained in the U.S. Shortly thereafter, he returned to his former position in party leadership. But the incident was not forgotten. It was to be added on the debit side of the ledger at Lovestone's final accounting. Then came the first blow. It was a letter from the political secretariat dated November 21st, 1928. The letter expressed sharp displeasure at the factional manner in which Lovestone had used the previous letter of September 7th. It pointed to the non-self-critical and self-congratulatory character of the statements issued by the majority in response to the September letter and expressed emphatic disapproval of the claim by Lovestone that the Comintern was continuing its policy of supporting politically the present leadership. This formulation, the new letter asserted, could lead to the interpretation that the Sixth Congress has expressly declared its confidence in the majority in contrast to the minority. But this is not so. The letter also called for the postponement of the party convention until February 1929. Clearly, Lovestone had overreached himself. Coming on the eve of the U.S. Central Committee plenum, the letter threw the Lovestonites into dismay and consternation. How do we explain the sharpened tone of this letter? It was a byproduct of the heightened counteroffensive against the international right and its conciliators, which had gotten underway after the Sixth Congress of the Comintern. It was a warning tremor of the quake that was to come. Internationally, the right had crystallized at the Congress, and immediately following, it had burgeoned forth in the USR and other leading parties of the Comintern. Thank you, acting. I got some nice tea. Get married, fellas. Get so your wife can bring you tea while you read communist texts. In Germany, it was expressed in allusions regarding the Social Democrats and in resistance to the organization of left unions. In France, it was reflected in opposition to the election slogan of class against class. In Britain, it surfaced as a non-critical attitude towards the Labour Party and a refusal to put up independent candidates. This new thrust of the right was met by a strong counteroffensive. In Germany, it led to the expulsion of the Brandeler Thalheimer right liquidationists. The CI intervened there on behalf of Thalmann against the conciliators Ewert and Gerhard Eisler. In the Soviet Union, the right line of Bukharin and his friends had encouraged resistance on the part of the kulaks and capitalist elements to the five-year plan, industrialization and collectivization. They resisted the state monopoly on foreign trade. This was reflected in mass sabotage, terrorism against collective farmers, party workers, and government officials in the countryside, burning down of the collective farms and state granaries. In the same year, 1928, a widespread conspiracy of wreckers was exposed in the Shakhty district of the Donetsk coal basin. The conspirators had close connections with former mine owners and foreign capitalists. Their aim was to disrupt socialist development. As a result, the counteroffensive could no longer be postponed, and the CPSU was obliged to take sharp action against the menacing right and its leaders, Bukharin, Rykov, and Tomsky. The opening gun against the right came on October 1928 at a plenary meeting of the Moscow Committee of the CPSU. At first, Bukharin was not mentioned by name. Other meetings followed. In early February 1929, at a joint meeting of the Politburo and Presidentum of the Central Control Commission, Bukharin was exposed as the leader of the hidden right. In the Comintern itself, the struggle unfolded after the 6th Congress. As Bukharin came under attack, his leadership became increasingly tenuous. De facto leadership of the CI passed to the pro-Stalin forces, and Bukharin became little more than a figurehead. His lieutenants, the Swiss Humberts Droz and the Italian Seller, also came under attack. Against this background, it was inevitable that Lovestone too would be smoked out in the open. We students held what amounted to a dual-party membership, enabling us to keep abreast of the situation in both the CPSU and the CPUSA. From our vantage point in Moscow, we held a clearer view of the developments in the CI than did our counterparts at home. As members of the CPSU, we participated in the fight of the school against the right. Molotov himself, Stalin's closest aide, came to the school to report on the decisions of the February 1929 joint meeting of the Central Commission of the CC of the CPSU and the Moscow Party Organization. Along with Bukharin, Rykov, and Tomsky, were exposed as leaders of a clandestine right in the Soviet Party. Molotov had moved into the CI immediately after the 6th Congress, a clear political move to offset Bukharin's leadership. Therefore, he spoke authoritatively on the ramifications of the international right and of Bukharin supporters in the fraternal German, French, Italian, and other parties. He didn't mention the CPUSA or Lovestone in his report, but we students did in discussion on the floor following his report. The Lenin School was a strong point in the struggle against the Bukharin right, just as it had been in the struggle against the Trotsky-Zinoviev left. The school reflected in microcosm the struggle raging throughout the CI for the implementation of the 6th Congress line against the right opposition. Here, we had the right on the run. They were in the minority and at a decided disadvantage from the start. For the entire school administration and faculty from Kursanova, the director, down were stalwart supporters of the Central Committee of the CPSU and its majority grouped around Stalin. Indeed, Lovestone had made a fatal mistake in allowing so many able comrades of the minority in the CPUSA to go to the Lenin School. He had undoubtedly already realized this. My group was now in its 2nd year. The students who had preceded us, including Hathaway, were back in the U.S., and Hathaway quickly became an outstanding leader of the minority group upon his return. We all had many friends in the Russian Party and in the CI, especially among the second-level leadership, people important in international work. Some of us were sent on brief international missions. For example, the Krumbians were sent to China and also to Britain. Rudy Baker, another student from the U.S., was also sent to China. A number of us American students were invited to participate in meetings of the Profintern, the Anglo-American Secretariat, and even the ECCI itself on occasions where American questions were discussed. I remember one such meeting that I attended as part of a group from the Lenin School. I had been sent by the school to extend greetings to a joint meeting of the Central Control Commission of the CCC of the CPSU and its Moscow organization held February 1929. As mentioned above, although I felt no need for an interpreter as my Russian was adequate, Gus Sklar was sent with me. He was a fellow student and one of the few supporters of Lovestone at the school. A Russian-American, he was completely bilingual and a very affable fellow. In my brief speech of greetings, I hailed the victorious struggle of the CPSU against the right and right conciliators under the leadership of Comrade Stalin as setting an example for us in the American Party. We have our own right deviationists, I said, Bukharin's friends in the American Party, the Pepper Lovestone leadership. I described the leadership's theory of American exceptionalism and its underestimation of the radicalization of the American working class and oppressed blacks. I ended my speech in a typical Russian manner. Long live the CPSU and its Bolshevik Central Committee led by Comrade Stalin. I listened attentively as poor old Gus honestly and accurately translated my speech. It certainly was a factional speech, but was greeted with applause by the Moscow officials and workers in the audience. Gus left the hall and proceeded immediately to the Lux Hotel to inform Lovestone's crony, Bertram Wolfe. Wolfe had recently replaced J. Lewis Engdahl as U.S. representative to the CI. He had been sent by Lovestone in the hope of improving communication between Moscow and the American Party. I recall that he was particularly riled by this speech. Several days later, there was a meeting of the ECCI on the preparations for the American Party's 6th convention, to which a number of us students were invited as usual. Wolfe, while giving his report, voiced a number of complaints. Citing my speech, he questioned the seeming lack of respect accorded the legitimate representative of the American Party. How is it, he wondered, that Haywood, a mere student, extends greetings to the Soviet Party? Why is it that he is given a platform at such an important meeting to launch a factional attack on the U.S. Communist Party? Why is it that when I report here, Lenin School students are always called on to give minority reports? These complaints were met with stony-faced silence by the members of the Secretariat. So a very interesting situation to be in for Harry, in this case. He's a student at this very prestigious communist institution. And the American Communist Party that sent him there is taken over by right-wing reactionaries or reformists or revisionists, however you want to frame it. And so he's trying to fight back against this as much as possible with the connections he has in the CPSU. Okay, this is me doing my best trying to piece together the party factionalism because, to be honest, this is not my favorite part of the text. This is not my favorite part of reading this book, all the inter-party fights and political maneuverings behind the scenes. Not for me, baby. But let's continue. Curtains for Lovestone. From Moscow, we students followed events in the U.S. with avid interest. Our line of communication was in good repair, as our stateside friends kept us well posted. We knew a showdown was imminent. Finally, the 6th convention of the CPUSA convened on March 1st, 1929. It was attended by 2 special CI emissaries with plenipotentiary powers, the German Philip Dengel and the British communist leader Harry Haywood. They brought with them 2 sets of directives. The first was public in the form of the final draft of the CI's open letter to the convention, and the second, confidential organizational proposals designed to ensure the carrying out of the directives of the open letter. The contents of the open letter were known. It had been circulated as a draft. We students at the Lenin School had participated in the discussions in the CI in which the letter was formulated. The open letter continued the balanced criticism of both groups along the lines of paragraph 49 of the thesis of the 6th Congress and the supplementary thesis. It held that both groups were guilty of unprincipled factionalism. It pointed to the absence of differences on principle between them. It said both were guilty of right mistakes. However, there was something new in the open letter. It pointed out that the source of the right mistakes of both groups lay in the idea of American exceptionalism. Both sides, it continued, are inclined to regard American imperialism as isolated from world capitalism, as independent from it and developing according to its own laws. To us in the minority, it seemed the scales were now tipped slightly but definitely against Lovestone. Though both sides were guilty of this error, it was the Lovestone faction which had articulated it into a full-blown theory and which I felt held to it the most strongly. The mistake of the majority is closely related to its great overestimation of the economic might and the powerful technical development of the United States. In this regard, the open letter emphasized that it is absolutely wrong to regard this technical revolution as a second industrial revolution, as is done in the majority thesis. It was a serious error, it stated, to infer that the remnants of feudalism were being wiped out in the South and that a new bourgeoisie with a new proletariat were being formed. Such overestimation of the results of the development of technique would play into the hands of all advertisers of the successes of bourgeois science and technique who seek to deafen the proletariat by raising a lot of noise about technical progress and showing that there is no general crisis of capitalism, that capitalism is still vigorous in the U.S., and that thanks to its extremely rapid development, it is capable of pulling Europe out of its crisis. The letter contended that technical transformation and rationalization led to further deepening and sharpening of the general crisis of capitalism. Basically saying here, the Lovestones, from what I'm gathering here, believe that there is something different and unique about American society, American imperialism, American expansionism, and that separates it from the traditional orthodox Marxist view that, capitalism fuels imperialism. The Lovestones believe something different, that American imperialism or capitalism is rooted not in capitalism but some other type of thing, whether that be racism, white supremacy, whether that just be a desire, that true manifest destiny spirit, whether that be, and that's a right-wing, that's a deviation, that's revision when you understand capitalism, right? So let's continue here. With regards to the minority, it criticized Biddleman's apex theory and stated that the sharpening of the general crisis of capitalism is to be expected not because American imperialism ceases to develop, but on the contrary, it is to be expected because American imperialism is developing and surpasses other capitalist countries in its development, which leads to an extreme accentuation of all antagonisms. The apex theory is the view that U.S. imperialism had reached its peak of development and would soon be brought to its knees, primarily by the weight of its own internal contradictions. The letter went on to condemn the factionalism in the party, stating, so long as two groups exist in the party, the further healthy ideological development of the party is excluded. It concluded by putting forth four principal conditions essential to the party's transformation into a mass communist party, the decisive significance of which neither the majority nor the minority have understood. The four conditions were: 1. A correct perspective in the analysis of the general crisis of capitalism and American imperialism, which is part of it. 2. To place in the center of the work of the party the daily needs of the American working class. 3. Freeing the party from its immigrant narrowness and secularism, and making the American workers its wider base. Paying due attention to work among Negroes. And 4. Liquidation of factionalism and drawing workers into the leadership. Clearly, the letter put an end to any basis for Lovestone's claim of CI support. When there were the CI's proposals for a new non-functional leadership, these were contained in the confidential organizational proposals brought by the two CI reps, Dengel and Pollitt. The proposals called for the temporary withdrawal of Lovestone and Biddleman, considered the two main factionalists from the U.S., and requested that they be placed at the disposal of the CI for assignment to international work. It advised the appointment of William Z. Foster as the new General Secretary. Pepper was again ordered to Moscow immediately and forbidden to attend the convention. Formal acceptance of the line of the open letter posed no difficulties for an unprincipled opportunist of Lovestone's caliber. In fact, the letter was endorsed by both factions, but the organizational proposals, which threatened to snatch power from Lovestone, were another matter. The crucial question for Lovestone and company was to retain control of the party. With his huge majority in the party, he felt he was in position to bargain with the CI, but the situation called for some fast footwork. While loudly proclaiming full agreement with the political directive and proposing its unqualified acceptance, he directed his main thrust at the organizational proposals, claiming they contradicted the political directive. Defying the CI reps, he and his partisans carried the fight to the convention floor. There they launched an unbridled campaign of defamation and character assassination against Foster, who was then favored by the CI to replace Lovestone. The minority, on its part, charged Lovestone with support of the deposed Bukharin. Not to be outdone, the Lovestonites supported a resolution denouncing Bukharin and calling for his ouster as head of the Comintern. Lovestone had no compunction in dumping his former political patron. Tempers flared, fistfights erupted on the convention floor. A group of so-called proletarian delegates, organized by Lovestone, sent a cable to the CI pleading for a reversal of the organizational proposals and that the convention be allowed to choose its own general secretary, subject, of course, to the CI's approval. The situation was so tense that the CI responded by conceding the right to the convention to elect its own leadership, and thus its general secretary, with the exception of Lovestone. They still insisted on Lovestone's and Biddleman's withdrawal to Moscow. Other than that, the convention, with its Lovestone majority, was free to elect its own leadership. Lovestone made his crony, Gitlow, general secretary. The CI also insisted on Pepper's return to Moscow. The convention ended up with the appointment of several Lovestone loyalists as a proletarian delegation, which would travel to Moscow and plead the majority case in the Comintern. The members of the delegation were mainly party functionaries chosen for political reliability. Led by the majority leaders Lovestone, Gitlow, and Bedakt, they went to Moscow to seek the repeal of Lovestone's assignment to Moscow and his prohibition from CPUSA leadership. So, very interesting. This was just a lot of party fighting and, trying to make sure that the party is cleansed of any sort of deviations from orthodox Marxism and Leninism. The scene shifts to Moscow. Since the 6th Congress, Lovestone had succeeded in covering his flanks on the Afro-American question. He had proposed Hoosewood as candidate for the ECCI, of which he was now a member. 5 blacks, Hoosewood, Otto Hall, Briggs, Edward Welsh, and John Henry, were elected to the new Central Committee. Lovestone's proletarian delegation arrived in Moscow on April 7, 1929. Its 10 members included 2 black comrades, Edward Welsh and Otto Hoosewood. I assume that the lineup of leading black comrades with the Lovestone crowd represented an alliance of convenience and had little to do with ideology. Up to that time, there had been no serious discussion in the party of the 6th Congress resolution on the Negro question. Foster and Weinstone also arrived to place the case of the minority before the American Commission. Weinstone had switched over to the minority during the 6th Party Convention and now supported the CI organizational proposals. Biddleman was also on hand, having conceded without protest to his resignment to Comintern work. The American Commission convened a week later, on April 14, 1929, in a large rectangular hall in the Comintern building. More than 100 participants and spectators were on hand. The commission itself was an impressive group and included leading Marxists from Germany, Britain, France, Czechoslovakia, and China. Among the delegates from the USSR were Stalin, Molotov, and Manolinsky. There were also top officials of the Comintern and Profintern: Kusinin, Gusev, Mikhailov, Williams, Lazovsky, Belakun, Kolarov, Kitarov, secretary of the YCI, and Bell. Kusinin was chairman of the commission, and Mikhailov was secretary. Among the invited guests was our large contingent from the Lenin. Sorry, technical difficulties. I just touched the screen and everything disappeared. How'd that happen? Anyway, sorry about that. Where were we? All right. So, among the invited guests was our large contingent from the Lenin School. I sat and looked over the proletarian delegation as we waited for the meeting to start. I knew Hoosewood, having met him at the founding convention of the American Negro Labor Congress in 1925, but I didn't know Welsh. He was a newcomer, having been in the party only a few months. There was Alex Norrell, a farmer from the West Coast, whom I had met in Moscow the year before. There he had been working in the Krestintern, the Peasant International, representing American farmers. There was Mother Bloor, whom I had met previously, She was a plump, kindly-looking elderly woman, formerly with the Foster faction. She always had a twinkle in her eye, and her gentle look belied her true character as a staunch, fierce proletarian fighter. A veteran of many labor battles, she was an impressive agitator. I wondered what she was doing in Lovestone's crowd. There were three others in the delegation whom I didn't know: William Miller, Tom Missersko, and William J. White. The commission's sessions were to last nearly a month. Gitlow led off, stating the case for the majority. A large man, his face screwed up in perennial frown, he was an ill-tempered sort. He harangued the audience for 2 hours, pouring invective on the minority, particularly Foster. Boasting that the overwhelming majority of the party supported his group, he praised Lovestone, contrasting the great so-called contributions of Lovestone with the shortcomings and failures of Foster. Woven throughout was the implication that the party would be destroyed if the Comintern's decisions were not reversed. He attacked Lazovsky, Profintern chairman, as being virtually a member of the minority faction. He wound up his pitch by calling for a reversal of the CI organizational directives to the CPUSA 6th Convention, stating that the removal of Lovestone from the leadership would be a damaging blow to the party. Foster replied in a more moderate tone, scoring the Pepper-Lovestone leadership and their theory of American exceptionalism as representing the right deviation in the U.S. party. He expressed outrage at the smear campaign launched against him by the Lovestone Group, which he said was designed to line up the party against the CI decisions. He called for support of the Comintern. Biddleman spoke, emphasizing that the downward swing of the U.S. economy was already taking place, and life itself refuted the Lovestone-Pepper optimistic prognosis. Wolf complained about discriminatory treatment by the ECCI, how his status as official representative of the CPUSA was not recognized, and how he was excluded from important discussions on the American question. At last, members of the proletarian delegation took the floor and spoke, damning Foster and praising Lovestone. After speaking, each one was questioned by members of the commission. The questions were designed to bring out their understandings of the issues involved. Nothing came out but a parroting of Gitlow and Lovestone. There was an undercurrent of belligerency and hostility to the commission and the Comintern. Loyalty to Lovestone was a hallmark of the delegation. I was particularly embarrassed by Ed Welsh. He was a tall, handsome young black. Welsh, I learned, had been in the party only a few months, but was a staunch henchman of Lovestone, who had placed him on the Central Committee. As he mounted the platform, anger, defiance, and disrespect for the commission was written plainly on his face. He launched into a most vicious tirade against Lazovsky, the chairman of the Profintern. Manulisky, a Soviet member of the ECCI, who was sitting in front of the rostrum, was so shocked at the virulence of this attack against a person of Lazovsky's stature that he started to rise to his feet in protest. Welsh waved him down with his hand, shouting, "Ah, sit down, you." Manulisky flopped back in his chair in open-mouthed amazement. Also, Tom Myerskosh, a mine organizer from the Pittsburgh area, also spoke. He was a tough-looking, blustering ex-miner. He strode up to the platform and declared that he spoke 3 languages: English, profane, and today I'm gonna speak cold turkey. The running translation came to an abrupt halt, and there was a momentary confusion as a translator stumbled over the slang term. In the end, Myerscoff's cold turkey turned out to be just another rehash of Lovestone's charges. The commission then brought up its big guns: Comintern and Profintern officials, Gusev, Kolarov, Lazovsky, Belakun, Heller, and Bell. They continued with a balanced criticism of both groups, but as the meeting went on, more and more emphasis was placed on the mistakes of the majority. Lazovsky, his eyes twinkling, stepped up joyously to the attack. It was evident that he welcomed this opportunity to settle old scores. He'd been subject to insult and slanders from Lovestone and company for several years, and now the day of reckoning had come. He directed his man's barbs against Lovestone and Pepper, dwelling at length on the strange case of Comrade Pepper and his fictitious travels. Pepper was first called back to Moscow in September 1928. The call was repeated in the organizational proposals of February 1929, and he was ordered to take no part in the U.S. Party convention. Pepper dropped out of sight, giving the impression that he was on his way back to Moscow. Pepper's account of what then happened was that he went to Mexico to seek transportation by ship to the Soviet Union. When no satisfactory arrangements could be made, he returned to New York and from there went on to Moscow. But during the period he was supposedly in Mexico, he was seen in New York at the time of the party convention there. Pepper had returned, we heard, but he was not present at any of the sessions. His case was before the International Control Commission. An arm of the CI and ICC was composed of representatives of 17 parties. Its functions were to supervise the finances of the ECCI and deal with questions of discipline referred to by member parties. Okay, let's just talk about this really quickly because this just hit me. There's a very good reason for this book to be titled Black Bolshevik. I know a lot of racists and white supremacists and just people that are generally ignorant, who never read books, would just look at this title and laugh and say, ha ha ha, look, we was Vikings, we was kings, and we was Bolsheviks. This is what racist white people would say. But this man was really in Russia. Everything I'm reading right now takes place in Russia. He has been in Russia for the middle of it, in 1928, in Russia, dealing with all this intra-party politics. And I'll be frank, I'm not that interested in it. It doesn't captivate me to no end. But this man deserves the title Black Bolshevik because, my God, is this not just a book of basically Game of Thrones like political machinations of communists who cannot get enough of cannibalism, who cannot get enough of eating each other. But it is important to get rid of right-leaning deviations and revisionists in parties. I do understand that. Anyway, so Lazovsky dwelt at length on Pepper's mysterious travels, how it was the longest trip on record from New York to Moscow, how he had somehow managed the impossible feat of being in two places at the same time. He spoke of how Pepper had faced a big decision, either return to Moscow or remain in the United States, which meant dropping out of the party. It took him a long while to make up his mind, Lazovsky observed. Kolarov, a huge Bulgarian, took the floor. He referred to Myerskov's cold turkey speech with heavy humor. He conceded that he lacked the linguistic skills of some of his American comrades, and since he didn't know anything about this cold turkey, he was just going to speak plain Russian. Stalin made his first speech at the commission on May 6th. Foster had introduced me to him at the beginning of the commission sessions. I guess Foster had wanted him to know he had some black supporters. I had met Stalin before, but I doubt that the great man had remembered me from our first meeting. I was now to hear him speak for the first time. Garbed in his customary tan tunic and polished black boots, he stepped to the rostrum. Very informally, leaning on the stand with a pipe in one hand, he began speaking in a calm, measured, scarcely audible voice. We had to strain to hear him. Stalin emphasized two main points, charging both the majority and minority factions with American exceptionalism and unprincipled factionalism. Both groups are guilty of the fundamental error of exaggerating the specific features of American capitalism. You know that this exaggeration lies at the root of every opportunist error committed both by the majority and minority groups. Stalin followed this with a rhetorical question. What are the main defects in the practice of the leaders of the majority and the minority? Firstly, that in their day-to-day work, they, and particularly the leaders of the party, are guided by motives of unprincipled factionalism and place the interests of their faction higher than the interest of the party. Secondly, that both groups, and particularly the majority, are so infected with the disease of factionalism that they base their relations with the Comintern not on the principle of confidence, but on a policy of rotten diplomacy, a policy of diplomatic intrigue. As an example, he cited the way in which both factions speculated on the existing and non-existing differences within the CPSU, adding that they are competing with each other and chasing after each other like horses in a race. He presented a 6-point program for a solution to the problems faced by the American Party. This included approval in the main of the ECCI proposals to the 6th Convention of the CPUSA, except that relating to the candidacy of Foster, sending an open letter to all party members, emphasizing the question of eradicating all factionalism, condemning the refusal of the majority leaders to carry out the ECCI proposals at the party convention, ending immediately the situation in the American Party in which important questions of developing the mass movement, questions of the struggle of the working class against the capitalists, were replaced by petty questions of the factional struggle. So basically, what Stalin is trying to say, Stalin comes to the podium, smoking his pipe, leans over and says, hey, y'all are bickering and bitching at each other, and this makes no sense. Once again, Stalin was trying to unify the left and say, listen, both of y'all are tripping because y'all think that America is somehow different. It doesn't have to follow the analysis, or it goes outside the analysis or the scientific dialectical materialism of Marxism. Somehow America is different. It's not. Both of y'all need to chill, and y'all need to focus on the main points of organizing the working class against the bourgeoisie capitalists. That's what Stalin is leaning over and saying as he's smoking his pipe. Stalin concluded by calling for a reorganization of the CPUSA by the Secretariat of the ECCI, with emphasis on advancing those workers who are capable of placing the interest and the unity of the party above the interest of individual groups. Finally, that Lovestone and Biddleman be made available for work in the Comintern so that everyone clearly understands that the Comintern intends to fight factionalism in all seriousness. Stalin's remarks indicated why the CI considered the development of the American Party so crucial and why it spent so much time in resolving its problems. The American Communist Party is one of those few communist parties in the world upon which history has laid tasks of a decisive character from the point of view of the world revolutionary movement. The 3 million new unemployed in America are the first swallows indicating the ripening of the economic crisis in America. I think the movement is not far off when a revolutionary crisis will develop in America. As Stalin was speaking, I looked across and saw Lovestone with a leer on his face. Earlier on during break in the session, I had run into him in the corridor. "Hello, Harry," he called to me. "You ought to come over to our side. We could use a bright young fellow like you." Rather taken aback at the man's gall, I said something like, "You've got your own Negroes." "Oh, that trash," he said with a deprecating wave of his hand, obviously referring to Hoosewood and Welsh. Okay, a little bit of racism within the party. "Oh, that trash." Okay, referring to the black people that were supporting the Lovestone right-wing group. Shocked by his crudeness, I was strongly tempted to ask how much he thought I was worth, but I was afraid he might have taken me seriously. The session continued as Molotov followed Stalin, speaking along basically the same line. He stressed the need to put an end to the factionalism which had corroded the party and held back the growth of the working class movement. He concluded by calling on the CPUSA to get on a new track to ensure the liquidation of factionalism, not in words but in deeds, and to ensure the transformation of its organization so that the party could prepare itself for the sharpening struggles and crises to come. It was now clear from the speeches of Stalin, Molotov, and other members of the commission which way the wind was blowing. For the majority, Stalin's speech was definitely an ill omen. Even though the subcommittee of the commission, Molotov, Gusev, and Kusin, had not yet reported out a draft of the commission's findings, Lovestone and company decided to force a showdown. From this point on, they began a series of veiled threats against the Comintern. On May 9th, 3 days before the subcommittee's draft was presented, the Lovestonites issued a declaration which accused the ECCI of supporting the minority against the majority and rewarding Comrade Foster with its confidence. Gambling that they would still be able to control the party at home, the Lovestonites arrogantly challenged the leadership of the CI. As a cover for their own splitting activities, they accused the ECCI of trying to split the American Party. This was clearly the rhetoric of splitting and was so considered by the members of the commission. It could only be interpreted as a threat to take the U.S. party out of the Communist International. On May 12th, the last meeting of the full commission was called into session. Kusanen, a chairman, reported the findings and decisions of the subcommittee. Their report was in the form of a draft address from the ECCI to the membership of the CPUSA, which had been circulated the day before. Addressed over the heads of the party leadership, it singled out the Lovestone faction for its sharpest attack. In this respect, it went much beyond previous criticisms, such as those of the open letter to the Sixth Convention. It now said that exceptionalism was the ideological lever of the right errors in the American Communist Party, adding that exceptionalism found its clearest exponents in the persons of Comrades Pepper and Lovestone, whose conception was as follows. There is a crisis of capitalism, but not of American capitalism, a swing of the masses leftwards, but not in America. There is the necessity of accentuating the struggle against reformism, but not in the United States. There is a necessity for struggling against the right danger, but not in the American Communist Party. The address charged the Lovestone leadership with misleading honest proletarian party members who uphold the line of the Comintern. It termed Lovestone's declaration on May 9th to be a most factional and entirely impermissible anti-party declaration, stating that it represents a direct attempt at preparing a condition necessary for paralyzing the decisions of the Comintern and for a split in the Communist Party of America. The draft address concluded with 5 points: a call for dissolution of both factions, temporary removal of Lovestone and Biddleman from work in the CPUSA, rejection of the minority demand for a special convention, a call for the reorganization of the Secretariat of the CC of the CPUSA on a non-factional basis, the turning of Pepper's case over to the International Control Commission. Presenting the draft address, Kusanen appealed to the Lovestone delegation. We call upon the comrades to turn back from this road unconditionally. Our subcommission deems it necessary to call quite definitely upon the delegation as a whole and upon every individual member of the delegation to state with absolute clearness whether they are prepared to submit to the decisions of the Communist International on the American question and to carry them out implicitly without reservations, yes or no. It will substantially depend upon your answer what character the measures of the Comintern upon the American question shall eventually assume. From your declaration, we see plainly that it is no longer a question of factionalism of the leaders of the majority of the CC against the minority group, but it is already a factional attitude towards the executive of the Comintern. Looking at all this bickering and infighting, I'm not surprised the Soviet Union dissolved the Comintern. And to be frank, it seems like the American Party made it worse. Because everywhere Americans go, we got to make it worse, unfortunately. God, I'm not surprised. This was the EU before the EU. My God. Imagine a bunch of leftists in a room trying to get along. This is what the Communist International was. My God. My God. You have a better chance of picking a good Netflix movie with all three of your girlfriends. The majority delegates, after provoking this showdown with the ECCI, refused to give a straight answer to the question posed by Kusanen, whether or not they would accept the decisions of the Comintern. They backed away, postponing a confrontation until May 14th. In the meantime, the majority leaders were secretly taking steps to split the party. By the way, we're going to read all of Chapter 10, and I believe there's only about 18 or so more pages. So we're going to blow through these last 18 pages and wrap up Chapter 10. And yeah, that's how we're going to try to chop down this book, this very thick book. We're going to read chapters, entire chapters during the live streams. In previous live streams, I didn't do entire chapters because they were like 40 or 50 pages long. But now we're big dogging it. We're going to just blow through this section of the book. Because honestly, while I find a lot of his life in the Soviet Union very fascinating, the party factionalism and infighting is not grabbing me. And I'm not trying to dissuade you from the book. Some people might find that fascinating. But this stuff, while you can glean things from it and learn from it, right, in party organization and party work, I think for me, it's just not that relevant right now. I'm not a party official. I'm a party member, but I'm not, actively involved in stuff like that, a mover and shaker in the party. So a lot of this stuff doesn't really move me or touch me as much as being a black man, a leftist, abroad, traveling, stuff like that. So I'm going to continue. So a cable drafted immediately after the May 12th meeting and telegraphed from Berlin on May 15th was secretly sent to caretakers at home, instructing them that the draft decision means destruction of party. Take no action, any proposals by anybody. The cable went on to state, situation astounding, outrageous, can't be understood until arrival, impossibility, entire delegation being forcibly detained. The cable then instructed the majority cohorts at home to start wide movements in units and press for return of complete delegation, take no action on any Communist International instructions, carefully check up all units, all property, all connections, all mailing lists of auxiliaries, all sublists, district lists, removing some offices and unreliables. Check all checking accounts, all organizations, seeing that authorized signers are exclusively reliables, appointing secretariat for auxiliaries and treasury disauthorized present signatory. Instantly finish preparation, sell buildings, especially eliminating Whinstone trusteeship. Remove mania rice. Okay. Kamal says agreed. Agreed to what? Let me know what you agree. Let me know what you agree, because I say a lot of things and then you just be like, I agree. Agree with what? By the way, if y'all have any other book recommendations, let me know. We're going to be, how many chapters do we have left? We're finishing chapter 10 today. We're finishing chapter 10, and then we have 11, 22. So we're at least having 12 more episodes. We're having at least 12 more episodes of Harry Haywood's book. So about, a week or two, about 2 weeks, we'll be finished up with this book. All right? Anyway, Lovestone's Moment of Truth. May 14th, the night of the big showdown, finally arrived. The Presidium of the ECCI, the highest body of the Comintern, convened to hear the report of the Commission and render the final decision on the American question. The Red Hall of the Comintern building was jam-packed with participants and onlookers, among them top-flight leaders of the Comintern and Profintern, political workers of both these organizations and leaders of many affiliate parties. We Americans constituted a sizable group. In addition to the 10 delegates, it seemed as though Moscow's entire American Communist colony was present. Aside from our large Lenin School contingent, which had attended the sessions from the beginning, there were now students from the Eastern University, Kutva, Maud White, Patterson, Mary Houston, Bennett, and Herbie Newton. Lovestone's moment of truth had arrived. During the month of sessions, tensions had been steadily building. We waited with eager anticipation for the outcome of the final session. Finally, the meeting was gavelled into order, and Kusanen, the chairman of the commission, read its findings. They were of the form of an address from the executive committee of the Comintern to all members of the Communist Party USA. He concluded by pointing out that the majority delegates had yet to answer the question he had posed in the commission of the 12th of the month. The floor was then thrown open for discussion. As an angry, scowling Ben Gitlow mounted the platform and read another declaration signed by the American Proletarian delegation. Although presented in a more diplomatic form than the previous declaration, this new statement continued the same factional and anti-party attack. As later characterized by the ECCI, it was a direct attempt to nullify the decisions of the CI and pave the way for an open split of the CPUSA. The declaration opened with some formal phrases asserting the adherence to its signers to discipline, loyalty, and devotion to the Comintern, and claiming to speak for the overwhelming majority of the membership of the party. It went on to charge the new draft letter to be contrary to the letter and spirit of the line of the 6th Comintern Congress. Our acceptance of this draft letter would only promote demoralization, disintegration, and chaos in the party. This is the only logical outcome of the line of the draft letter. There are valid reasons for our being unable to accept this new draft letter, to assume responsibility before the party membership for the execution of this letter, to endorse the inevitable irreparable damage that the party line of this new draft letter is bound to bring to our party. The audience sat in stunned silence at the outright defiance of the Comintern. It was a clear declaration of war. Following Gitlow's tirade, members of the Presidium and leaders of other parties took the floor and attacked the declaration, pointing out its anti-party splitting character. They pleaded with the rank-and-file members of the delegation to remain loyal to the Comintern. This plea was joined by a number of our Lenin School students. Zach, Cowell, and Lena Davis all spoke. During this part of the discussion, Stalin took the floor for the second time. In his usual calm, deliberate manner, he delivered a scathing blast at the majority leaders, Lovestone, Gitlow, and Bedagt. He characterized the May 9th declaration as super-factional and anti-party. The May 14th declaration was still more factional and anti-party than that of May 9th. He called the new declaration a deceitful maneuver drawn up craftily by some sly attorney, by some petty fogging lawyer. On the one hand, the declaration avows complete loyalty to the Comintern. The unshakable fidelity of the authors of the Declaration of the Communist International. On the other hand, the declaration states that its authors cannot assume responsibility for carrying out the decision of the Presidium of the Executive Committee. If you please, on the one hand, complete loyalty, on the other, a refusal to carry out the decision of the Comintern. And this is called loyalty to the Comintern. What sort of loyalty is that? What is the reason for this duplicity? This is hypocrisy. Is it not obvious that this weighty talk of loyalty and fidelity to the Comintern is necessary to Comrade Lovestone in order to deceive the membership? It cannot be denied that our American comrades, like all communists, have the right to disagree with the draft of the decision of the Commission and have the right to oppose it. But we must put the question squarely to the members of the American delegation. When the draft assumes the force of an obligatory decision of the Comintern, do they consider themselves entitled not to submit to that decision? Stalin then dwelt at length on the evils of factionalism, and his barbs hit us in the minority as well as in the majority. He held up the American Party as an example of the havoc factionalism can wreak. He stated that factionalism weakens communism, weakens the communist offensive against reformism, undermines the struggle of communism against social democracy, weakens the party spirit, it dulls the revolutionary sense, interferes with the training of the party in the spirit of a policy of principles, undermining its iron discipline, completely nullifies all positive work done in the party. He warned of the majority against playing trumps with percentages and denied their claim of majority support in the U.S. party. You had a majority because the American Communist Party, until now, regarded you as the determined supporters of the Communist International. But what will happen if the American workers learn that you intend to break the unity of the ranks of the Comintern? You will find yourselves completely isolated. You may be certain of that. Stalin's speech really stuck home to me. I had been a member of a faction for the whole 5 years I had been in the party. I had been recruited simultaneously into the party and into a faction. Thus, when Lovestone took over, I had shifted from the Ruthenberg faction to the Foster faction, but after the past month of discussion, there was no getting around the fact that factionalism had harmed the party's work. It was clear the party could not make the turn to the left and, in particular, develop the black movement without the elimination of factionalism. And I think, honestly, that one paragraph in that one speech from Stalin could have been all of this. I understand, once again, I understand writing down all of this because this is the meat and this is the meat of the book, essentially. This is the justification for the title, Black Bolshevik. Why does Harry Haywood title his own autobiography, Black Man in a Russian Faction of a Leftist Movement? Why? It's because he actually was in Russia, a part of a faction of the Communist Party, and deeply involved in the political machinations and intrigue of the party, right? I get that. The point that he's trying to make here is that factionalism, sectarianism, splitting off into different groups, saying that, yeah, we're on the same side, but they're different than us. They're not like us. This is not going to lead towards liberation, right? If there are general things that we agree on and orthodox that we can adhere to as scientific socialists, then we should try to adhere to that and stay as close together as possible. Yes, people will have disagreements. Yes, people will, see things differently, but we shouldn't just split off into factions and groups and try to go our own way. We should be united. You get what I'm saying? So that's what I think the point of all of this is getting at. And that was a very powerful paragraph. That was a good paragraph. I'll be honest, these last two chapters have not been my favorite. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 were fire. Maybe even chapter 4 as well. But, these last few chapters where it goes deep into party politics have been a sludge. It's a sludge fest as we try to get out of here. But let's continue here. It was now after midnight, and the Presidium was finally called to vote on the draft address. It was accepted with one vote against cast by its only American member, Gitlow. A poll was then taken of each of the majority delegates. Each was called to a platform and asked directly if he or she accepted the decision, yes or no. There was a ripple of excitement when Baddox, a majority leader and hitherto staunch supporter of Lovestone, broke with the majority and declared that he accepted the decision of the Presidium and would carry it out. He was joined by Norral, the West Coast farmers organizer. Lovestone stood by the majority declaration. 6 others, including Welsh, answered that while disagreeing with the decision, they would follow the communist discipline and accept it until it could be raised at the next party convention. Gitlow spoke last. He declared that not only did he disagree with the decision, but that he would actively fight against it when he returned to the U.S. Again, Stalin took the floor, evidently dissatisfied with the hedging of most of the American delegation. In a quiet voice, he pointed out that the American comrades apparently do not fully realize that to defend one's convictions when the decision had not yet been taken is one thing, and to submit to the will of the Comintern after the decision has been taken is another. He said it involved the ability of communists to act collectively and is summed up as the readiness to conform the will of the individual comrades to the will of the collective. He denied that the American Communist Party would perish if the Comintern persisted in its opposition to Lovestone's line, arguing rather that only one small factional group will perish. The Presidium decision, he concluded, was important because it will make it easier for the American Communist Party to put an end to unprincipled factionalism, create unity in the party, and finally enter on the broad path of mass political work. The historic meeting was finally adjourned at 3 a.m. the morning of the 15th. It was nearly summer, and as we passed into the street, the early dawn shone on Moscow's gilded church domes. We Lenin School students headed towards our dormitory off the Arbat. At first, we were all quiet, each one engrossed in his or her own thoughts, trying to piece together what had happened and assess what it meant for the party. Breaking the silence, someone asked me if I had witnessed the incident between Stalin and Welsh as we were leaving the hall. No, I said. What happened? It seemed that on our way out, Stalin passed Welsh, who was standing in the aisle talking to Lovestone. Stalin, in a friendly gesture, extended his hand to Welsh, as if to say, we have our disagreements, but we're still comrades. Welsh rudely rejected. Remember, this is a black man from the United States rejecting Stalin's handshake, which is wild. There's like top 3 things, wild things to do in life. That's wild. That's wild. Okay. Welsh rudely rejected the preferred hand and in a loud voice said to Lovestone, what the hell does that fellow want? In relation to Stalin. A black man stood up to Stalin when Stalin put out his hand to shake it. Short little Georgian man who in a few years will slaughter Nazis. And hit Trotsky in the back of the head with an ice pick, told Stalin when he tried to shake his hand, what the hell does that fellow want? That boy was turned up. DMX went to the Soviet Union. Sticky Fingers from Onyx went to the Soviet Union and said, what the hell does that fellow want in relation to Stalin? That's funny as hell. There was something strange about Welsh I didn't like. His attachment to Lovestone seemed to transcend any communist or political principles. I wasn't really too surprised at that incident, remembering the earlier one with Manulisky, but I was glad I hadn't seen it. The Lovestone drama was drawing to a close. The Comintern moved with dispatch to head off the threatened split. On May 17th, 2 days after the Presidium meeting, the political secretariat of the CI removed Lovestone, Gitlow, and Wolfe from all positions of leadership in the Comintern and in the party. At the same time, all three were detained in the Soviet Union to await the formal disposition of their cases. Lovestone was warned that to leave the Soviet Union without permission of the Comintern would be considered a violation of communist discipline. Bedagt, Weinstein, and Foster, who supported the address, were immediately sent home. Mikhailov Williams was also sent to the States as CI rep. The Comintern cabled the 3,000-word address to the CPUSA. It was received by Lovestone's caretakers, Miner and Stachel, who immediately disassociated themselves from Lovestone. Along with the leading 10-man majority caucus, they pledged to follow the Comintern decisions. The Central Committee met the same day and unanimously called upon the delegates remaining in Moscow to cease all opposition to the CI. On May 20th, 5 days after the meeting of the CI Presidium, the address was published in the Daily Worker and became the property of the entire party membership. Lovestone's double dealing and deception were now apparent to all. The mandate for the Sixth Convention had limited him to seek review of the CI decisions, not to defy them. In the following days, there was a flood of letters and resolutions from former Lovestone supporters denouncing him, repudiating the actions of their former leaders in Moscow, and unconditionally supporting the Comintern. On May 24th, Huswood, Noral, and Mother Bloor were still in Moscow, issued a statement. They maintained that they still disagreed with the CI, but had no intention of resisting. The Central Committee sent up interim leadership composed of William C. Foster, Robert Miner, W. Weinstein, and Max Bedagt as acting secretary. The new leadership immediately inaugurated a mass campaign to educate the rank-and-file party members about the political issues involved in the struggle. This campaign swiftly swung the vast majority of the party behind the CI. On June 22nd, the U.S. party was notified by the CI that Lovestone had left Moscow in violation of the Comintern decision and without meeting his promise to submit for publication a political declaration retracting his opposition. Gitlow and Wolfe had left before. Upon his return to the U.S., Lovestone continued his splitting maneuvers. By the end of June, all three were expelled from the party. Thus, Lovestone's attempt to split the party failed completely. It was repudiated by almost his entire following. His boasted 90% majority shrank to 2%. Only a couple hundred bitter-end right-wing factionalists remained loyal to him and were expelled along with him. The political and organizational line of the Sixth Congress was soon vindicated. Scarcely 3 months after the expulsion of the Lovestonites came the stock market crash of October 1929, signaling the onset of the great economic crisis, which was to engulf the entire capitalist world and exacerbate the already deepening general crisis of capitalism. The crisis shattered the bourgeois liberal myth of American exceptionalism perpetrated by Lovestone and Pepper. With the elimination of the 6-year factional struggle and its chief perpetrators, unity was at last achieved. The party was now in a position to carry through the left turn called for by the Sixth Congress, now capable of leading the great class and liberation struggles of the next decade. The political degeneration of the Lovestone leaders was rapid and predictable. Lovestone formed a so-called Communist Party opposition group, declaring its purpose to be the reestablishment of communism in America. He kept up the pretense of being a Marxist-Leninist for a few years, but when his anti-party campaign proved ineffectual, the group fell apart and Lovestone embarked on an open anti-communist course. Interesting. So he was bitter. He was bitter to the end. And they always reveal themselves, don't they? They always reveal themselves, don't they? He later placed himself in the service of the reactionary trade unionists Matthew Wohl and David Dubinsky, with whom he helped sponsor the AFL-CIO anti-communist crusades. In 1963, Lovestone moved up to international prominence as director of the AFL-CIO's Department of International Affairs and George Meany's foreign minister. The International Affairs Department had its own network of ambassadors, administrators, and intelligence agents, and collaborated closely with the State Department and the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, in reactionary subversion of trade union movements in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Europe. John Pepper was expelled from the party with the International Control Commission, not for his political crimes, but for lying with respect to the trip to Mexico, which he never made, and for falsifying an expense account for a fictitious trip to Korea. He wound up working for the Gosplan, State General Planning Commission in the Soviet Union. I occasionally saw him on Tverskaya on his way to or from work. What a come down for Pepper, from the glamour of international politics to a bureaucrat's desk in the Planning Commission. Edward Welsh remained Lovestone's Man Friday. That's hilarious. Calling another man Man Friday is hilarious. Many years later, in the early 50s, I ran into him in the streets in New York City. We immediately recognized each other. Surprised and curious, I asked if he were still with Lovestone. He said he was, adding that he knew I was still with the party. Neither of us had more to say. There was an awkward pause. We said goodbye and went our own ways. Back at the Lenin School, we of the former minority were elated by the decisions of the Commission and the news of the complete rout of the Lovestonites at home. The political and organizational decisions of the Comintern were accepted unanimously at the meeting of American students held shortly after the close of the Commission. Factionalism was condemned and the unity of the American students achieved. It was at this meeting that the last two Lovestone holdouts, Gus Sklar and H.V. Phillips, finally capitulated. All right, we rolled the credits. We rolled the credits on that very tense political movie. We rolled the credits. All the bad guys were defeated. The communists cheered, and then the Soviet Union fell, unfortunately, a few years later. Sad. Let's continue here. The Crimea revisited. It was a midsummer, and I was again on my way to the Crimea. I looked forward with pleasure to revisiting the lovely peninsula with its subtropical climate, lush beauty, and of course, its warm and friendly people. It would be a month until school began, and I intended to spend half my time in rest and relaxation and the remainder in practical work, which in this case was further observations on the national question. Arriving in Sevastopol, I went immediately to the party headquarters, where I presented my letter of introduction to the local party secretary. Where did he think would be the best place for me to go, I asked. The secretary, a big bluff man of Russian or Ukrainian nationality, was evidently very busy. The anteroom was crowded with people, undoubtedly with more important business than mine. He was polite and friendly, however, and in what seemed to me a split-second decision, he said he knew just the place for me, Alushta. It was a resort town on the coast about 25 kilometers beyond Yalta, where I had stayed 2 summers before. He offered to put me up in a rest home where his party organization had a number of places reserved. That sounded good to me, and I asked him if I would have an opportunity to study the national question there. Oh yes, he assured me, you'll find a number of nationalities in the town there. Tatars, Greeks, Karaite Jews, Germans, Ukrainians, and even some Russians. How many more could you want? He joked. And he wished me good luck as his secretary called in the next person from the crowded anteroom. I waited outside while she typed the letter of introduction and then asked her for directions to the Coast Artillery Barracks. It was a regiment adopted by the school in a special fraternal relationship which included mutual visits and cultural exchanges. We students also sent them literature and periodicals from our respective parties. This relationship heightened their political understanding of the international situation and the communist movement abroad. For us, it deepened our insight into the role of the Red Army as a politically conscious guardian of Soviet power. It furnished a concrete illustration of how the Red Army functioned. I had met some of the members of the regiment in Moscow, but this was to be my first visit to their barracks. I arrived at the barracks, which were situated on the outskirts of the city, near the coast, and was greeted warmly by the political officer of the regiment with whom I had met in Moscow. He introduced me to other officers and men. I was then taken on a tour of the gun sites. They were big coastal guns, elaborately protected behind earth and concrete fortifications. They were so expertly camouflaged that it was impossible from the sea to tell anything was there. The huge guns were hidden in underground emplacements. Each had its own electrical system, which raised it by elevator to firing position. After firing, they would drop back to their concealed pits. Under each gun was what seemed to be a virtual machine shop. They had observation posts established along the coast to control the long-range fire of the guns. They were proud of their guns and especially proud of their new British range-finding equipment. I asked how they had gotten hold of that, and an officer grinned. Well, that's what the British would like to know. After touring the gun sites, I left Sevastopol. I felt Sevastopol was well defended against any attack from the sea. But alas, the enemy attack on Sevastopol 13 years later, during the Second World War, was not to come from the sea. It came from the land when the Nazi army smashed into the Crimea across the narrow Perekov Isthmus, connecting the Crimea with the Ukrainian mainland. The hero city of Sevastopol was to withstand the siege for 250 days before it fell after putting up a stubborn defense which tied down the powerful German army. Next came the inevitable Bechead informal conference with the army men. I was plied with questions about the United States, conditions of blacks, and Lovestone and the right deviation in the party. I gave them a rundown on the recent decisions, described the participation of Comrade Stalin, and the eventual expulsion of the Lovestonites. I was impressed by the high political level of the question they posed and the knowledge they displayed of the American affairs. I stayed with them overnight and was invited to a big, hearty meal at their mess. Discussions continued until the bugle sounded lights out. Next morning, I was escorted to the station. From there, we drove a lovely scenic route to the town of Alushta. Alushta was a beautiful little town by the sea with the Crimean mountain range rising immediately behind it. I found myself in a modern rest home on the outskirts of town with the beach conveniently near, a perfect place to relax and rest. I met the party secretary of Alushta, a Tartar. He introduced me to some members of the party committee and town soviet. These committees, I found, were representative of the various nationalities and ethnic groups in the area. But in general, I found nothing particularly new on the national question. It was similar to the situation in the Yalta area where I'd been 2 years before. All groups were living in peaceful harmony, and the cultures of each were mutually respected. Stress was laid, however, on the development of the Turkic language and culture of the Tartars, who comprise the main nationalities of the Crimean Autonomous Republic, about 1/3 of the total population of the peninsula. After them came Ukrainians, Russians, Greeks, Jews, and Germans in that order. The Tartars, however, were regarded as the basic nationality, and it was their homeland dating from the days of the Golden Hordes. These were sufficient factors for an autonomous republic to be set up for them in 1921 with a Tartar president. But after a couple of weeks in the Crimean paradise, I became restless and bored and longed to be back in the hustle and bustle of Moscow. I felt isolated. I wondered what was happening in the U.S. party. I'd had no news of developments and had heard nothing of the unfinished business of the black national question. I wanted to talk to Nasanov about plans for our Negro Commission in the Comintern. Then, not least, I missed my wife, Inushka. Now he mentions Ina. Dog, it's been 100 pages since you mentioned Ina, Inushka. It's been 100 pages. I thought she died. I thought I missed a paragraph or something where Ina had passed away. Very interesting stuff about the Tartars. I know some Crimean Tartars. They still speak their language. A lot of them live in Ukraine. Some of them have fled Ukraine because of the war there, of course. And it's interesting, that the Tartars never got their nation. I wonder if Harry is going to mention that Stalin, kicked out the Tartars, and a lot of them are still pissed about that. Anyway, let's continue here. Hold on, wait. Okay. All right, I don't know what happened. There's missing pages here. I don't know if this is right. Let me just check something real quick. Yeah, because page 434 just jumps out of nowhere. That's hella strange. I don't know why page 434 is right there. Let me make a note of that when I do read ahead, I'm going to have to, catch that and come back here to page 434 is in between pages 310 and 312. Okay. Anyway, let's wrap up the last section of chapter 10, Return from the Crimea. I returned to Moscow a few days before the school opened in order to spend some time with Ina. from where I learned that a young Russian woman who worked in the chancellor's office at Kutva had returned from vacation in the Crimea and was spreading malicious slander about me, portraying me as an insatiable womanizer. The woman was known among the Kutva letter from the school and known what I was supposed to do. Wait, what? The woman among the Kutva. Why is there a missing page? Okay, 310, 312, 313. Where's 311? There's a missing page here. My God. So what, just when the fucking book gets juicy? Ah! Are you serious, my guy? Are you serious? I just read through 40 pages of political BS, of the left eating itself. And just at the point when there's rumors and gossip spreading, my God, shade room type of shit. Now the page is missing. You gotta be fucking kidding me. Ah! What is that? That's so fucked up. Are you serious, my guy? That's so fucked up. Come on now. So there's a woman spreading rumors that he was cheating on his wife that we haven't heard about for 100 pages. And then the page is missing. What the hell? 310. Where's 311? If 311, I might have to do some research on this. I might have to stop here because maybe 311 is mixed with page 434. Let's go to page 433 and see if that's there. Let's go to page 433. Let's see. 433. Maybe it's going to be there. That would make sense, right? 409. Let's jump ahead. 433. Maybe that's where the missing page is. It's what the hell? All right, 433. No? Are you serious? What is that? What the fuck is that? Dog, where's the missing page? I jumped to the part where the pages got mixed around, and now this page is in here. I am so pissed. Are you serious? What the fuck is this? Come on, man. Just when it got good. God damn it. God damn it. Let's go to back to 310. If I find page 311, I'll read it. But I can't right now. I'm so pissed. You know what? I'm going to stop it right here. Because I need to find out what happened to Ina. I'm going to find out what happened to Ina if he cheated on his wife. We have to find page 311. This is a mission for everybody. Go to libcom.org. Get this book. See if you can find page 311. I don't have time right now. I gotta go. Kamal says, you think it's a game? You think it's a fucking game? Ain't that so fucked up? We read through all that BS about, 100 pages of communists fighting each other and debating their ideas behind closed doors at the Comintern. And when it gets juicy, a page is missing. Now, I wouldn't fault Harry Haywood for, ripping that page out if he really did cheat on his wife. You get what I'm saying? Because that's none of my business. But you decided to write about it, my guy. So where's the missing page? We're going to find page 311 before we finish this chapter. So we're going to stop reading today. We're going to stop reading today. We're going to find page 311 and find the section Return from the Crimea. And we'll start there in our next live stream. So y'all be easy out there. I want to give a shout out to Kamal and Akti and everybody who's turned up for this live stream. I appreciate it a lot. Y'all be easy out there. Peace. 311. 311. 311.